What does it take to create a vibrant, thriving life? First, the sad news is that Thoreau was right. Most people are leading quiet lives of desperation, lacking in meaning, fulfillment, and vitality. But we choose more. We choose to create extraordinary lives. And the Art of Vibrant Living show entertains you with inspiration, empowerment, and education to create your life into a masterpiece. It's time. Let's vibe up. Aloha, y'all. Welcome to the show. I am Daniel Aaron, your host. This is the Art of Vibrant Living show. And guess what we do on this show? Well, hopefully we entertain you, we inspire you. Most importantly, though, we empower you to live your most vibrant, thriving life. So, a request on that note, yes, entertainment, inspiration, and take some action. Like, say, we're going to get some amazing experiences, information, wisdom today. I'm excited about this show. Take something of what Dr. Jessica offers you and say, yeah, I'm going to put that in. I'm going to try that out. I'm going to put it in place in my life. And if you would like some assistance to have an even more vibrant, thriving life, if there's something you're struggling with or something you'd love to create, please also reach out to me. Send me an email, daniel@danielaaron.com. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And on that note, let me introduce to you our guest today, amazing woman. And actually, before I tell you about her, what could be more important in your vibrant, thriving life than relationship, sex, love, right? That's the juice of life, right? Okay. Dr. Jessica Gold is the founder of Bliss Science Coaching and her new AI platform, Digital Wisdom, which developed the relationship coaching app, Jessica Gold AI. She's an MIT-trained PhD organic chemist who left her academic career to unexpectedly spend 4+ years living in tantric communities, where she became a Tantric Scientist. As a passionate relationship coach for powerful men, she has helped hundreds of men in tech, leadership, and finance rekindle passion in sexless marriages, get out of their heads, and feel confident as lovers, attract the high caliber woman of their dreams, and master the art of relating to women. Her work and life are chronicled in her Tedx talk, Chemistry for Your Sex-Starved Marriage. Oh, that hurts just saying it. Oh my goodness. Dr. Jessica dares you to believe that your sex life and relationship deserve to be given at least as much time as working out or developing your latest AI app. Heck yeah. Dr. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
I love everything that you've said so far. Well, those were your words that I read. It's beautiful. It's awesome. We could talk about what's in your bio alone for an entire hour. There's so much in there. And first, though, not everybody here knows your story, and it's a cool story. How did you get to this point in your life?
Sheer tenacity and daring.
It takes that. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it takes that to live an extraordinary life, a vibrant life, right? But and in what ways though? How do you mean that?
Well, I'm so thrilled that I got to change my life completely the way that I did. But first, it did take a lot of courage and persistence, perseverance to be a scientist. It was very much a man's world when I was working in lab for 10 years, doing my undergrad, my PhD, and my postdoctoral fellowship. And it was a grind. We were all pretty much cut off from the neck up, cut off from the neck down, rather, and living in our heads, right? Really being stuck in our heads. And then when I got the message one day that I wasn't supposed to be doing that anymore, I didn't even believe in messages or things like this. But the voice of my heart broke through. I say, after going to Burning Man one too many times, I finally, there were some cracks in the armor. And it took a lot of courage to listen to the voice of my heart, because I felt a lot of shame at the idea of leaving my scientific career. So that was a really big leap. It was huge. No one understood it at the time. I was scared to even take 1 year off. I thought, who will ever employ me again if I am not working for a year? Those were different days. And then when I did find the place that lit me up inside, that seemed like, oh, this is what I'm meant to be doing, it really was not socially acceptable. My family didn't understand. I even thought it was like perhaps the strangest thing I could have stumbled upon. And it required so much courage to stay. And then finally, to become an entrepreneur, being a nerdy scientist, I didn't have training I didn't have an MBA or training in how to run a business. So learning all of those skills, it's fascinating, but that also required intense amounts of courage and tenacity over the years. So that's how I got to where I am.
Thank you. Okay. You finally heard the message. You heard the message. You listened to the message. Now that, to me, cries out for, how did that happen? You use the word crack. I have a chapter in a book of mine called The Crack, right? It's a whole chapter. So I love what you just said. I love those words. And what was it? What happened? How did you hear it?
Well, what is the quote that says, love the cracks because that's where the light gets in? There's a beautiful poem about that. So basically, I was just grinding as a scientist. It was really hard. We were expected to work long hours, and I pushed myself just naturally. But in the process of that, I received zero education in how to be a healthy human. So my relationships were suffering, my health was suffering. I was suppressing all my emotions, and they were coming out in physical symptoms like chronic anxiety, over drinking, lack of good sleep. It was starting to really take a toll on my body. And so, how to put this? I think in that case, after a while, like, you just can't go on like that anymore. And part of me was trying to break free of, I felt like I had a duty to work as hard as I possibly could to make all the money I could so that I could be responsible and have enough for retirement, and maybe save enough to like pay for my children's college. And it was like a lot of pressure, and I pushed and pushed and pushed. And at some point, I had the gift to get to do my PhD in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there was a lot of experimentation going on, like I said, going to Burning Man, doing authentic relating. There was experimentation in sexuality and dance and psychology and psychedelics. And so I was in these underground communities of people who were really exploring, like, what does it mean to be human, to be fully alive? And I think just over 10 years for me to continue to slowly turn toward those things allowed the crack to get bigger and bigger. Until one day, I had a really impactful year at Burning Man in an authentic relating community where what mattered was not my pedigree or my accomplishments, but who I was in the moment. And it was so confronting because I didn't know who I was in the moment or what gifts I brought. I hadn't been trained in presence, empathy, connection. I hadn't been trained to value those things. But when I felt so loved and so accepted, and it was rich and nourishing, and I wasn't wedded to my to-do list, like trying to just accomplish the next goal as quickly as possible and just letting days go by in an endless stream of tasks. I was like alive and connecting, and it was a relief. So when I came home from that experience and faced, at that moment, I was working at a biotech company and faced like the windowless cubicles and the smell of microwaved fish and, like, it's terrible. And this endless commute, which always drove me crazy because I was like, why do we all have to drive at the same time? This makes no sense. And begging for 2 weeks of vacation every year, I just looked at my life and I was like, I cannot, like, this can't be my life. This cannot be what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but it's not this. And so that was how I was able to listen.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And golly, so many people I know can relate to that. And part of what's beautiful about what you said is some people who are either, watching now or going to watch or listen later will hear what you just said and they'll go, oh, I think that might be happening with me right now. You mean it's okay to let this crack open up, right? That's beautiful. So, and then and I want to get on here to what you're up to now and what came after this transition, because there's so much in that. Still, that there's something else you said a moment ago, which is that for you, when you were leaving your life as a scientist, there was shame in that. And would you be willing to say what was going on with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had dedicated 10 years of really, really hard, excruciating work to getting my PhD and doing my postdoctoral fellowship and publishing my research and getting the awards and the funding. I had really, really put a lot of my life force energy into it. And it's also a dangerous career, organic chemistry. So to think that maybe I had been too stubborn and been not on the right path all that time, I felt embarrassed. Yes. And, I felt also worried about my family. How would they explain this to their friends? They were really proud of me. And also, I was 33 when this was happening. So I was at an age when most of my friends were getting pregnant or getting promoted. And instead, I left my career because what can an organic chemist do? I mean, yes, I could do medical writing or science writing, but and I had done some of that, but those doors just weren't opening for me. There's nothing you can do as an organic chemist outside of lab. So I felt like I had this expertise that was confined to one area, and I left. I stepped outside of the rat race completely. I went to live in a spiritual community and not have an income and not know how I would ever be employed again. And that's where I come from. That's the definition of being, irresponsible.
Yeah, worrisome. Oh my God, she just joined a cult. What's going to happen? Right. And I can sort of joke about that because, I so many times my family said something like that about me. Like my brother calling me up and said, I just heard from mom that she thinks you've joined a cult. And I was like, she's not exactly wrong, but kind of wrong.
Sure.
Yeah. And I can, barely imagine how challenging that must have been to the way I think of it sometimes is it happens often for some of us that we're climbing a ladder. Like, somehow we put our ladder up against this tall building and we said, that's the place to go. I want to go there. And then we're just like climbing and climbing and climbing. And then at a certain point, like we pause and go, am I on the right ladder? And that's like this moment of like, uh-oh, is the ladder am I gonna like let it go off? And what's gonna happen then? So kudos to you for summoning that courage to listen to your heart. Right? I think of that. There's a great Native American saying that the longest human journey is from the head to the heart.
Yeah.
Right? So you said maybe one too many Burning Mans, and I think I read somewhere that you is your fifth one that turned the thing, right? And wonderful, that was quick, right? Because a lot of people, they just keep climbing the ladder, like screw it, man. I'm just gonna keep going. I don't care if I don't feel good or if it's killing me. So yeah, thank you for that. Now, there's so much more we could speak about with that, and 4+ years living in tantric communities. You went and lived in a spiritual community. I did a lot of that myself. So I'm super curious to learn what was that like, but especially what was that like for you? I mean, it's not like you went straight from being a sort of only academic scientist, because I heard you in terms of those, you had those, the time where you're starting to experiment and encounter these alternative communities in the Bay Area, which is great. So you're getting warmed up in that. It must have been, though, like something like going into the deep end when you were actually living in a community. Is that true? Or what was your experience like?
It was wonderful, to be honest. And I had completely denigrated anything to do with spirituality. I was like a hell no, hard no to all of that. I was a dedicated scientist, atheist, agnostic, and not interested in taking up anything having to do with any sort of religious trappings. It took me completely by surprise because I really didn't understand what the tantric scholars and sages were about. I had never actually learned. I just had all these misconceptions in my mind, but it was actually a very sophisticated, deeply beautiful tradition with complex writings and gorgeous practices and a very, very practical approach to life. That was exactly what I needed. And when I realized that what they were up to was actually studying awareness, then everything opened up and fell into place for me. Instead of motivating myself through punishing myself and self-criticism, I was able to get curious about my experience of life and start to perhaps be kinder to myself. It was a revolution. And so to be able to get up every morning, I was living in this wooden hut on a hill across the street from the ocean. And I had this giant balcony overlooking the ocean. And it was just this one room wooden hut with, all the insects and animals in there with me. But to just not have to worry about what I was wearing or being cold and being on my little motorbike and going down and there was like the yoga classes, there was, pranayama, kundalini, there was philosophy classes, there were meditation retreats, there were group classes. Because it was a tantric community, there was a sexual element as well, like a sexuality track where I could study that part of my being, which heretofore I had only shamed and dismissed and felt cut off from. And so I would say it was delicious food for all the parts of me. And it was warm. And I was like, what if I let myself be happy? I didn't ever allow myself that before. And I thought, wow, I am really nourishing myself here. The food was nourishing and simple and easy. I mean, everything was easy. And I could just be with my body, be with my emotions, and start to get curious about like, okay, what does nourish my soul in this life? What am I here to do? And so those aspects I think they saved my life. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And as you say that, I feel this like great nostalgia warming my heart. For me, I was similar to you in a way in that I was agnostic, maybe atheist, agnostic, just in case, I don't want to burn any bridges, right? And then I got this like divine whack upside the head that took me from not believing, past believing, into knowing, which totally screwed up my whole life, of course. And then the first thing I did when I came out of that was I went and lived in a spiritual community. And it was so nourishing and beautiful and powerful. And, one of the ways I describe my own past is, so I was a fat kid. And part of the reason for that was I grew up on the SAD, standard American diet. Yeah. Though not just in terms of the processed food and the junk food and all that, though we did that too, but also just in terms of the beliefs and the values that is sort of the standard American diet. So when I, encountered something else that was like, hey, relationships matter. Hey, feeling good in your body matters. Like,
Yeah.
you know what? Actually being happy and present, whoa, that was so mind blowing to me.
Right. And to me, those sounded like weak, like distractions. Like, oh, why would you care about that? I need to be efficient and I need to succeed.
100%. Yeah, I'm with you. And so I can relate to that on the level that before I had that divine whack upside the head, I was a martial artist and I
Mhm.
was competing and, and it was tough and I was pushing and challenging and pain is good. And then when I first heard about yoga, I was like, oh, that's like just like pansy stuff. Come on, that's,
Uh-huh.
ridiculous. And then when I first actually got into yoga, I was like, oh, this is a little harder than I thought. I'm not so good at this as I thought, which is in many ways true of like being present, right? All that stuff. So let me ask you this though. You you brought up the word tantra somewhere in here a couple times, and
Mhm.
and we both know I have some experience, not to the degree that you have probably. Tantra is so misunderstood, right? That word, you defined it a few minutes ago as the study of presence. Did I get that right?
Well, that's one aspect, studying awareness, the spark of
Oh,
awareness. Yes.
awareness, yeah.
Mhm.
And of course, I don't know, actually, most people, a lot of people hear it and they're like, oh, that's how to have better sex, right? Um, and so, what is it really, though? Would you tell us?
Well, I think they're both right. I actually have a whole course on this, and so the sexuality part I define as neo tantra, which was essentially developed in the modern West with a little spark of inspiration from the classical tradition of the East. But neo tantra is about the unshaming of your sexual self,
Hmm.
and using awareness to move through the world and how you relate and how you relate to sex. And of course, as Westerners, we really need that. And that's a fantastic set of practices. And I'm so grateful that those exist in the world. But for me as a scientist, that would never have been enough. I needed something more. And so I started asking all of my teachers, where did all this come from? What is this really? Show me the books, show me the original writings. Like, what the hell is this? I needed to know, as a scientist and a researcher. So I started researching the tendrils, the threads back to where this came from.
Hmm.
And I discovered the Indian tantric tradition, and of course, the Tibetan tantric tradition is much more well developed and is known in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana. All those practitioners are well acquainted with tantra. But so the classical Indian tradition of tantra, is a sophisticated spiritual tradition that is about awakening from suffering, liberation from suffering, awakening to the truth of who you are, and the study of awareness. I like to say that the tantrics were the original scientists because they did really deep inquiry into how humans work, and they were trying to explain how our body worked before we had any scientific words. So they used energy instead of talking about the nervous system, for example, and chakras instead of understanding like blood flow and the nervous system in our body. And they actually did a pretty good job of trying to understand what was going on a microscopic level in our bodies before any of that science equipment existed.
Hmm.
But they did it all through uh, subjective individual experience. So, really getting quiet and going within and using mantras, visualizations, awareness practices to really understand the nature of mind and the nature of reality. And, modern Western science uses, well, to the best of our ability, objective measurements. We try to do experiments that can be repeated, that are controlled. Like, that's a technical term, meaning you compare it to something you're not experimenting on. And objectivity reigns. We look at objective data, but the tantrics were looking at subjective data as their information because that's what we had before science came along. And so that's what classical tantra really is about. And the reason this matters is because classical tantra is a incredibly empowering practice. It allows you to go deeper into the richness of your life. For me, Instead of every day just going by in a blur of tasks, it allows me to sink into my moment to moment experience of life and incorporate pleasure, incorporate awareness and the body, and really deal skillfully with my emotions, with my body, with my desires, and with my relationships. Because Tantra was about using everything in your life as a householder practice to liberate yourself, awaken from suffering. It's not a monastic practice where you go away as a monk to do practices. You practice in the context of cooking, cleaning, raising your kids, working, relating to your spouse. And so, I mean, I could talk about this for an hour, as you can see, but to sum it all up, I separate those two. There's Neo-Tantra, which is about the unshaming of our sexual self. And then there's classical Tantra, which is a sophisticated spiritual tradition from the Indian subcontinent that flourished around the year 400 to 1400 of the Common Era.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's great. Super clear. And so then how do they relate to each other? You know, those two, say, branches.
Well, that is one of the most fascinating things you can study. And I've had so much fun reading about this over the years. So there's a professor of religions named Hugh Urban who wrote a book. It's an academic book called Tantra. And it explains a lot of how classical Tantra got translated and misunderstood into Neo-Tantra. There's also a book called, I'm forgetting the name of it right now. It's a book on the history of the chakra system that also very, very well explains that. And of course, Christopher Wallace, who's one of my teachers, his book Tantra Illuminated traces that history. But I think Hugh Urban's book is the best. And I wish I could remember the name of the chakra one. Alas, we'll put it in the show notes. But in the cliff notes are that when the British went to colonize India, there were some people who were really interested in the occult, and they formed this society called the Theosophical Society. And this was in the 1800s. And one of the founders is this woman named Madame Blavatsky. And she's an incredible historical figure. Definitely go look her up. So Madame Blavatsky and her co-Theosophical Society people, they ended up witnessing some tantric rituals. And they didn't understand what they were, but they were fascinated. And they were some of the first people to start to write about Kundalini and the chakras, and to take what they saw of the rituals, along with like other British colonialists who were just scandalized by, they just had very racist views of Indians. So they just sensationalized anything they found of tantric spirituality in India and twisted it. And so all of these things got filtered through the lens of racism and also occultism. Aleister Crowley, put his imprint on it, the sex magic guy. And also this man named Pierre Bernard, who founded some love cults in upstate New York in like the 1920s, the early 1900s, and many, many other very colorful figures from early 1900s America. All of these people shaped what came to be known as Neo-Tantra. It also had influences from the 1960s counterculture movement, because by then Tantra had become synonymous with like rebellion and liberation. And so famous people such as Annie Sprinkle, the porn star, she created this thing that then became known as Tantra massage, for example. And so all of these different influences, it's such a colorful story. Fascinating. It's like when you're getting bored and you want to remember how wild humans are, read about the history of Neo-Tantra. And so those are some of the tendrils that helped form it.
Wow, fun. Yeah, I'm with you. It's fascinating. I love the Theosophical Society and those esoterists that were part of that. And cool. And and it's like one of the ways I think of it is there's always the pure original, and then the toxic, or maybe not even always toxic, but just the derivatives that go off from the original. Right. My favorite example is cacao. There's this amazing cacao bean and now we have Mars and M&M and Snickers, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so there's something valuable about the pure original, and there's also something valuable about the evolution and the way things change. And I know for me, I've gotten a lot out of Neo Tantra from growing up as a puritanical New England and uptight and ashamed of my body and thinking sex was bad. And so I'm
Yeah.
super grateful for that. Well, let's go to the next part, because if I'm understanding right, you've really evolved your work with this, right? You had your own liberation and your study and shifted your life, and now you work particularly with men and founders and tech and finance. What's brought you into that world? What's going on there?
Absolutely. Oh, and I remembered the book on the history of the chakras. It's called Rainbow Body by Kurt Leland. It's a very fun book to read. So because I had this very deep shift in my life, and it was like I was living in black and white before, and I feel so much more powerful now, so much more alive. It's like really coming into what I was meant to do. I couldn't believe that I never got taught any of these relational skills that I learned in the spiritual community. I had never had a single class on how to deal with my emotions, how to relate skillfully, how to communicate non-defensively, what to do with my desire, how to take responsibility, how to get out of victim mentality, like how to have good boundaries. I had zero idea about this. And those things then, like my hair trigger reactions, my ingrained modes of talking, which defaulted to defensiveness, those things were running my life. And it made my friendships shallow and stressful. It made social situations awkward. It made my intimate relationships tumultuous and challenging. And ultimately, I was just trying to make everything work through sheer force of will. And that was incredibly exhausting and stressful.
Were there any,
Luckily,
sorry
yes.
to interrupt, just to check, were there any downsides to that lack of education? I'm sorry. I'm joking, because what you just said is like, it's heartbreaking, all these things that you hadn't learned about and all the ramifications of that. I hear that and I'm like, oh my goodness. So thank you for pointing all that out.
Not only had I not learned about them, I had been taught that it was uncouth, that it was just not done to learn about these things. I had been taught that psychology was weird. I shouldn't ever study it. Don't ever go to therapy. That's just for really broken people or the weak. And I should never need to study myself. And yeah, that's a tough situation to be in. So it's a miracle that I ever broke out of that. But when I did, and I started to learn, I can turn the scientific and researcher lens on my own self without shame, blame, or judgment, but to really get curious and hold myself with love and ask for help and all these things and learn. I mean, it is endlessly fascinating to study my own reactions to life every day. But when I realized I could do that, I thought, wait a minute, I want to reach out to other people who were like me. And I saw that men were being really underserved in the field of personal growth. And I thought, well, I want to reach out to men. Also, I tend to have a more analytical mindset. I tend to have a higher sex drive. I really felt like I didn't so much identify with women's experiences, although I do also work with women. And I'm also rebellious. I'm like, I want to do something different. And I was like, I want to understand men's experiences too. I want to know what y'all are going through when it comes to relating and desire and sex. I mean, when I unshamed my desire, I was like, whoa, that's a force to be reckoned with. And I thought, well, if that's even a tenth of what men have to deal with, I'm like, wow, I get it now. Like, I get it, why it's hard. And so I wanted to reach out a hand to people like me who are scientists, who are in tech, who were left-brained, analytical, who were maybe afraid to listen to the body or the heart, or had been taught that studying these things is just not done or is a distraction. And also, I wanted to help men really understand women. So that, because my whole mission is for us to understand each other instead of to keep fighting in this dumb war of the sexes. Because I know that having an incredible partner and a fulfilling relationship where we're in it really intentionally is the foundation of my ability to show up in the world with love, with care, and to do my most meaningful work. The other thing is, like, it's such a well-known pattern. Everyone talks about it in every coaching book. All the therapists talk about it. It's the default that if you are driving really hard to be successful in your job, especially if you're a left-brained analytical man, you will likely end up with your success feeling hollow and your wife leaving you in a multi-million-dollar divorce if you don't learn relational intelligence. And, like, again, there's no shame in this. I had to learn it myself, right? So I'm not coming at this as if, like, I know better. It was really hard for me to let myself learn it. But I do want everyone to know that life is so much more fun and pleasurable and fulfilling when you learn this.
100%. That was beautifully said. Thank you. As you said that, I had this flash to when I was, I don't know, in my 20s somewhere. I was living at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, another spiritual center. And my mother came for a visit. And I was like, great, wonderful. And so she was there for, I don't know, a few days, and I took her around to different things. And I brought her to, I don't remember what it was, but some kind of group. And I was in the midst of my education or deprogramming process there. And for the first time in my life, I learned, oh, I have feelings that I can speak about. I can ask for what I want, a lot of, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I know it was revolutionary when I learned I could ask for what I want instead of trying to manipulate to get it.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. And there was just a beautiful moment where, I was like so curious to see how my mother was going to do with all of this. And then at one point we're in this, circle, 8 people maybe, and like the talking stick came over to her of some sort, and she said, "I'm not like you people. I don't talk about my feelings."
Oh, bless her.
Exactly. I was like, oh, you could. It's never too late. But yeah, it's phenomenal that human beings don't have that as a standard part of our education. It's just really, really weird. And it makes a lot of sense that I like the way you built the bridge from your experience and your academic and scientific background and the ways that you can relate to men, especially in those fields. So tell us more, like how do you help them? How do you work with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I like to use my Bliss Science method, which is why I call my business that. And when I say I'm a Tantric Scientist, it means that I turned my scientific lens inward on my subjective experience instead of it always being outward. And that's what I help you do. So in the Bliss Science method, we look at helping you develop authentic personal power that doesn't come from trying to control everything with your mind. We look at relational intelligence, and we look at wise and sacred sexuality. And some of the aspects of developing authentic personal power are noticing if you're relating to the world as the conscious creator of your life or as a victim in victim mentality. If you're being totally honest with yourself about what you want and who you are. If you're developing secure attachment to yourself. If you have self-compassion and self-worth. And I have to say, so that's the first pillar. It's really actually beautiful and fun. I know it might sound like a lot of things, but I'm just giving you examples of some of what we work with. It depends on what you bring. It's actually fun and beautiful to do this work. The second pillar, relational IQ, relational intelligence, I help you develop emotional intelligence, great communication skills so that you get what you want with your partner. She understands you, you feel heard, and you don't have to worry about upsetting her. You learn each other's operating manuals. So many of us were taught to be passive in relationships and then complain about what we're not getting. Or we think that the other person should just know, but that is not true at all in modern relating. You have to teach your partner what your operating manual is. And then learning to have great boundaries. So many men I work with really love women and really care, and they've become nice guys, however. So they're bending over backwards to please her and not having any boundaries of their own. This leads to resentment that pushes her away, and it also leads to her not respecting you and killing the passion. And then we look at bringing the lens of curiosity to your relationship. Instead of having to always know the answer, you can just be like, tell me more about that. I actually don't know what to do here. And then in the third pillar, wise and sacred sexuality, this changed my life so profoundly. So many men I work with are stuck in linear models of sex that it's just like a 1, 2, 3, 4, and it always goes in a straight line. You always do the same things, and they're afraid that, you know, they'll be criticized by women, or she won't like it, or she won't have the pleasure she wants. And thank you so much for caring about that, about women's pleasure. That's amazing. And I want to give you permission to play, to get it wrong, to have it not always be hot, and have it be a collaborative effort together. And I also want to show you how to develop your own erotic life, not dependent on women. And I had to do this too. So how to let in the sensory pleasure of life in every moment through your senses, instead of relating to pleasure as something bad, relating to it as, which is what science says, essential for our happiness and quality of life. So those are a few of the things, just to flesh out the 3 pillars. Again, authentic personal power, relational intelligence, and wise and sacred sexuality.
So what I understand then is this is a 21-year program that you've created. No, I'm joking, of course, though. As you say that, I'm like, oh my goodness. And that gives me a beautiful reflection. Like, I've been into personal and spiritual growth for about 30 years now. And everything you said, I'm like, okay, I have some awareness, some skill, and there's plenty of room for me to grow in every one of those components of the curriculum there.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, it's not about getting somewhere, right? Like, the growth is the goal. And I really do mean that.
Yeah.
Like, I will be peeling away layers for the rest of my life. And I find that to be fun. It makes life interesting. You don't need to beat yourself up because, like, oh, I don't have perfect, like, erotic life or something like that. That is counterproductive. But honestly, it takes 6 months. Truly and truly, a good 6 months of dedication, and you can tip these things, right? And then it just flows from there. You know, some of my clients stay for a year, 2 years, because they love having me in their back pocket. So you get direct access to me, and we have an ongoing conversation, and they just absolutely love having me there to help them, you know, relate to women skillfully, with as much pleasure as possible. But honestly, I've seen such awesome results in 6 months.
Yeah, and you know, my sense is the world is speeding up, right? We are continuing to stand on the shoulders of the people before us, even as you gave us sort of the evolution of Tantra. Like, it moves faster, right? We're getting wiser as a culture.
I hope so. I think some of us are. Some of us seem intent on, you know, closing in and being less curious, right? There's a big divide there.
For sure, for sure. Charles Dickens' words are always true, and always truer than it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's so much to speak about and talk about with all of that you just shared. Though, if it's okay with you, let's zoom in into the third pillar and talk about orgasm, right? Because that's always an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Always an interesting topic, and I think one that's charged, has shame, has opportunities for liberation, can be misunderstood. There's a lot of different thoughts and approaches on it. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely
Like,
talk about that.
my wheelhouse. Yeah, let's bring it on. Okay. So, well, actually, this is kind of a weird thing. I never thought of it this way, but what is orgasm and what's the importance of it? Would you say that?
Sure. Yeah, we can start there. So I really like to use the words of one of my teachers, Layla Martin, who says that orgasm is pleasure, expansion, and a change in consciousness.
Hmm.
3 of those happening together. Now, some might argue it could just be pleasure and expansion. I think it sometimes is. Anyway, I don't really care what the definition is. What I'm interested in is there's like a gateway. There is a certain loss of control you have to be willing to do, a certain messiness and surrender, at least for women and for men, to have full body energy orgasms. And that is such a deep path to walk. Especially for me, who's always interested in controlling things and like mentally forcing and making stuff happen by tightening. I think allowing ourselves to zoom out from intercourse and standard ways of orgasm and getting curious and being like, what other ways can I run pleasure through my body allows orgasm to be like this whole playground of possibilities. Now, I think one of the harms that Neo-Tantra did, and there were a lot of harms caused by Neo-Tantra, because when you take part of a spiritual tradition and you extract it from the guardrails and the grounding and the oversight, things can get really fucking weird. And they did. But one of the things that it did was it sort of enshrined orgasm as the most important thing in sex. And I think that does a disservice to all of us. For example, I work with a lot of men who have sexual shame. So contrary to popular understanding of men and women, there are many men who really want emotional connection with their partner and who struggle to desire sex as much as their female partner. Especially there's men who struggle with challenges with erections. And one of them, he came to me and he said, like, I'm tired of feeling stressed out about whether or not I'm going to be able to get hard. I just want to be able to have a sexual experience that doesn't have to involve orgasm, but that I still feel satisfied and fulfilled by. And I think that inquiry is so liberating. And I would like to see more of that for everyone. It's a little bit counterintuitive because women forever have been saying, focus on female orgasm. So I also want that to happen because throughout history that was ignored. So it's a both and proposition here. Let me see. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think part of my experience and part of what my own personal liberation was through various aspects of Tantra was like, it's okay to talk about this stuff, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, I remember first learning that, and then like the first time I was with a partner and I was like, I'm going to talk about what's going on right now. That feels so wrong and so scary.
I
But,
know.
once we opened it up, it was like, oh, what a relief. So in some ways, that's part of what's going on for me now is like, hey, let's just bring this out into the light, right?
Yes. And that is part of what was awesome about living in a community where we talked about this. I couldn't believe it, but we openly at lunch, would just talk about orgasms or sex or energy and stuff like that. And it changed everything. And learning Neo-Tantra also allowed me to become like a nerd about sex and just be awkward and study it and get curious and do experiments that fail. And be able to just stop and be like, hey, what are you feeling? Or what do you want right now? Right? Like, it
Mm,
doesn't have to be this one smooth thing. And I know a lot of men are really terrified that if they don't do it exactly right, she'll not want you anymore or not want to have sex with you again, or even less than she already does. But I promise you that if you bring it into the light and give each other permission to relax and be awkward and play, that it will make it so much better.
mm,
Um, and that's also the benefit if you don't have a community handy of people just talking openly about sex. It's helpful to work with a practitioner, and this is part of what I love is to be the one to bring you that permission and to give you that example of like, hey, I'm totally comfortable talking about this. I love talking about this, and I hope you get that transmission from me to empower you to bring that to your life.
mm. Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so let me. I see we're running out of time, and I want to ask a little bit more on this specifically, and then we'll see what happens. There's like, yeah, part of what you described is that there's been in my lifetime anyway, I've seen this sort of liberation of women's orgasms,
Yeah.
right? And I've seen so much beauty in the tantra worlds I've been in, where women who were not able to orgasm got to the place where they could, right? And that's so beautiful, right? And we know there's this societal holy grail of multiple orgasms, right? Then on the flip side, there's, I think, some challenging confusion for men, because there's there's the fear of, we call it premature orgasm, right?
Mhm.
Then there's this, I don't think it's well known, but there's a somewhat known thing, like a lot of men believe, better that I don't orgasm, I shouldn't orgasm, right?
Sure.
And of course, there are deeper roots to that and benefits and philosophies and all that. And then there's another school that's not spoken about much. I don't know many people that actually suggest the healthiest thing in a relationship is for neither partner to orgasm,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So, what's the right answer, Dr. Jessica?
Oh, such a great question. I am not interested in going to extremes in my work.
Hmm,
I'm also not interested in prescribing what I think is best for you.
hmm,
I'm here to support you in discovering, what is calling to you.
hmm,
For me, what I've learned from my spiritual practice of classical tantra is to just notice like what are our tendencies? What are our habits? And what would it be like if we antidoted those?
hmm,
So if you are always focused on ejaculation, what would it be like to not focus on that for a while? Or if you have a very strict practice of never ejaculating, which I don't recommend, what would it be like to loosen that? Like what? And so we always just look at where have we become calcified or rigid, and where do we need more energy, more curiosity, more play? And as far as the school where no one should orgasm, listen, like you can cherry pick research to support anything these days. So if that's your game and if that's working for you in your relationship, then by all means. But again, I'm not here to go to extremes. I think that what is going on is that what we're asking for from relationships today is different than at any other time in human history.
hmm,
And this is known. Like we've never before asked to be in a romantic love partnership where we are raising children, both of us working and trying to keep passion and being primary lovers with each other over decades. That
hmm,
is a completely new thing. And so there's lots of people who are trying to figure out how to make this work with all kinds of different fringe solutions to that. And humans are incredibly diverse. If I've learned being a practitioner, a coach for the past 10 years, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of men, couples, and women. And what I've learned is that humans are incredibly diverse in how we relate in our sexuality. And I really don't think it's wise to have a one size fits all way to go.
Awesome. I love that, right? Everybody is different. And I also love the way you spoke about the tendency and the antidote, because for me, part of what that implies and connects to is that life is always unfolding, right? And if we've gotten calcified in your terms, if we've gotten stuck or reached a limit over here, how would we grow if that loosens up, right? And if we go over here, how would we grow there? Because there's always more.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, and if I'm remembering correctly, you have a free gift for our audience. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. I have many free things that you can study. I think the one that I'm offering here is the Neo Tantra, how to incorporate Neo Tantra into your life now. It is a much more deeper and insightful guide, and probably different than anything you ever imagined. Yeah, the manual you've always wanted to introduce Neo Tantra into your life. So definitely check that out. And please do read it and write to me and let me know what you thought and what you're going to be using and what was also like, oh, hell no. I'd love to hear what you think. And this is from my 10 years of tantric study and practice.
Beautiful. Okay. And so the URL, the web address for that's on the screen right now, though. If you are listening and not watching, I'm gonna read it out for you right now. It's bliss-science.com/neotantra, NEOTANTRA. Super cool. Thank you for that. I mean, goodness, that's a manual that I certainly didn't get when I came into this earth at school or from my parents.
Right. It's definitely my number one most downloaded free gift. So check it out. Cool.
Thank you. All right. And I think, Jessica, that brings us, Dr. Jessica, to our last question. So sad. We're going to have to do 40 more shows to talk about all the juicy things here. The big question that I have for you.
Yes.
And it's a big question because clearly you have learned and experienced so much and you have so much to offer. Though when I ask you now to boil that down, to distill it, to bring it down to one thing, if you had one thing to offer to help people to live their most vibrant, thriving life, what's the one thing that you suggest?
I would say get curious about your experience of life. Instead of relating to yourself with blame, shame, or judgment, what if you could just ask yourself, what is wise about this?
Beautiful. I love that. Curiosity skilled the cat, right? So, and it's absolutely one of the most fundamental aspects of a good life, a vibrant life.
Yeah. I had not heard that one yet.
Excellent. So, Dr. Jessica, not only thank you for being here, but thank you for the courage that you had to make that journey from your head into your heart and body, right? To face all that you had to face to make that transition, and then to bring your, can I say obsessive nature, your study nature, your deep dive nature into something that's so powerful and meaningful and beneficial to you and all of us, and for being here and, taking this time and sharing it with us.
My pleasure. And thank you for seeing that. It feels really lovely. It's awesome to get to talk to you about these things. Thank you for your thoughtful questions.
A pleasure and honor. Awesome. Okay. And y'all, my friends in our audience, thank you, because guess what? You are the heroes of this adventure. You are not only interested in vibrant living, you're doing something about it. Ooh, by the way, do something more, right? Like beyond just learning the stuff, what can you play with? What can you try? What can you study? Certainly grabbing Dr. Jessica's manual would be a great first step. There's so much there though. And please, I hope you will join us again soon. I love that you all are here. Super grateful to be with you. Thank you. I love you. See you soon. Aloha. Mahalo for tuning in to the Art of Vibrant Living show, y'all. I'm Daniel Aaron, and may you live with great vibrancy.